Dust coated Drew Montgomery's boots as he dragged his spurs across the porch of his lonely ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold that no longer moved him. It was 1878, 3 years since he'd buried his heart alongside his young wife Sarah in the small cemetery on the north end of his property. At 32, Drew had convinced himself that chapter of his life was over, sealed shut like the lid of a coffin. "Another day done," he muttered to himself, settling into the creaking wooden chair that had been his only companion for too many evenings. His ranch hands had all retired to their quarters, leaving the main house as empty as his chest felt. The Rocking M Ranch sprawled across 500 acres of prime Montana territory, but for all its expanse, it couldn't fill the void that remained in Drew's life. Drew ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, now showing threads of silver at the temples despite his relatively young age. The letter that had arrived that morning lay folded in his vest pocket, its presence burning against his chest like a brand. His foreman, Frank Dawson, had suggested the idea months ago during a particularly difficult cattle drive. "A man needs a woman, boss," Frank had said, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. "There's plenty of ladies back east looking to start fresh. Mail order bride, they call it." Drew had dismissed the notion outright, but Frank, persistent as a summer drought, had taken matters into his own hands. Now the reply to an advertisement Drew hadn't even placed was scorching a hole in his pocket. And a woman named Zara Bishop was due to arrive on tomorrow's stage from Billings. The whiskey bottle on the small table beside him caught the dying light, amber liquid promising temporary respite from his thoughts. Drew reached for it, then stopped. If this woman was really coming, he'd at least face her sober. Dawn broke clear and cold across the Montana plains, frost glittering on the late October grass. Drew had barely slept, his mind churning with thoughts of the stranger who might soon occupy his home. He'd spent the night alternating between anger at Frank's interference and a reluctant curiosity about the woman brave or desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a man she'd never met. "You're looking mighty fine this morning, boss," Frank said, his weathered face splitting into a grin as Drew emerged from the house wearing his least worn shirt and freshly brushed coat. "Almost like you're expecting someone special." Drew scowled. "I ought to fire you for what you did." "But you won't," Frank replied confidently. "Not when you see Miss Bishop. Her letter sounded right proper. I don't need a wife. No man needs a wife, some just deserve one." Frank's voice softened. "Sarah would want you to be happy, Drew. It's been 3 years. Drew turned away, unable to respond. He mounted his horse and set off for town alone, determined to explain to this Miss Bishop that there had been a mistake before putting her back on the next stage east. Dustville wasn't much of a town. A general store, saloon, small hotel, and a handful of other establishments strung along a single dirt street. Drew tied his horse outside the stagecoach office and checked his pocket watch. The stage from Billings was due any minute. When the cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, Drew felt his heart quicken despite his resolve. He stood stiffly as the stagecoach rolled to a stop, watching as the driver secured the brake and jumped down to open the door. The first passenger to emerge was a portly businessman, followed by a young couple. And then she appeared, one gloved hand accepting the driver's assistance, her face obscured by a modest bonnet. Drew's breath caught in his throat as she looked up, revealing features that stole what remained of his composure. Zara Bishop wasn't what he had expected. Instead of the plain, desperate woman he'd imagined, she stood tall and straight, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue-green, surveyed the dusty street before landing on him with unsettling directness. "Mr. Montgomery?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. Drew cleared his throat. "Miss Bishop." She nodded, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I believe you were expecting me." "There's been a misunderstanding," Drew said, the words coming out more harshly than he'd intended. My foreman sent that letter without my knowledge or consent. If she was shocked or hurt, she hid it well. Only a slight tightening around her mouth betrayed any reaction. I see. I'll pay for your return ticket, Drew continued, reaching for his wallet. The stage east leaves tomorrow morning. Zara Bishop's spine stiffened. That won't be necessary, Mr. Montgomery. I didn't come all this way to be sent back at the first sign of difficulty. She glanced around the small town. I'll find employment here. Drew frowned. Madam, this isn't Boston or New York. There's not much work for a woman in Dustville. Then it's fortunate I didn't come looking for charity. She turned to the driver who was unloading her trunk. Is there a hotel where I might stay? The Dustville Inn's just down the street, madam, the driver replied, nodding toward a 2-story building. Not fancy, but clean enough. Thank you. She reached for her trunk, but Drew stepped forward. Let me help you with that. I wouldn't want to impose, she said coolly. Drew felt the eyes of townspeople upon them, curious about the newcomer and no doubt already speculating. Dustville thrived on gossip, and an unmarried woman arriving on the stage would provide fodder for weeks. It's no imposition, he insisted, lifting the trunk. It was surprisingly heavy. What have you got in here, Miss Bishop? Rocks? Books, Mr. Montgomery. I brought my books. Something about that simple statement made Drew look at her more closely. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was character in her face, intelligence in her eyes, and determination in the set of her jaw. Her chestnut hair was swept up beneath her bonnet, though a few wayward strands had escaped to frame her face. You read a lot, he asked as they walked toward the inn. Whenever possible, she replied. Books have been my constant companions. Drew nodded, understanding more than she might have guessed. After Sarah died, he'd found solace in the books she'd left behind, reading by lamplight during the long, empty evenings. The Dustville Inn's proprietress, Mrs. Holloway, greeted them with undisguised curiosity. New arrival, Mr. Montgomery. This is Miss Bishop, Drew said. She needs a room. Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose. Just passing through, dearie. My plans are undetermined, Zara replied evenly. Miss Bishop came as a mail-order bride, Drew found himself explaining, but there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted to one of sympathy. Oh my, that's unfortunate. Well, we have a nice room available. How long will you be staying? I'm not certain, Zara said. A few days at least while I determine my options. Drew set down her trunk. Mrs. Holloway, please put Miss Bishop's stay on my account. That won't be necessary, Zara protested. I insist. It's the least I can do considering the circumstances. Their eyes met in silent battle, and Drew was surprised when she yielded with a nod. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery, that's very kind. As Drew turned to leave, a strange reluctance slowed his steps. Miss Bishop, I'm sorry about the confusion. If there's anything you need while you're in town, don't hesitate to ask. Actually, she said, there is one thing I'd like to understand what happened. Perhaps you could explain over dinner this evening? Drew hesitated, then nodded. I'll return at 6. The afternoon dragged as Drew attended to business in town, his mind continually drifting to the woman at the inn. What had possessed her to travel so far to marry a stranger? What kind of life had she left behind? These questions nagged at him as he purchased supplies and spoke with the blacksmith about shoeing several horses. At 5:45, Drew found himself standing outside the Dustville Inn, hat in hand, feeling more nervous than he had in years. He'd considered not showing up, but something about Zara Bishop's direct gaze had made him feel bound to his word. She was waiting in the small dining room, having exchanged her traveling clothes for a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes. Her hair was still up, but more loosely now, with soft tendrils framing her face. Mr. Montgomery, she greeted him, gesturing to the chair across from her. Thank you for coming. Drew sat, suddenly aware of his rough appearance compared to her neat composure. Miss Bishop, Mrs. Holloway served them a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread along with coffee. When she left them alone, an awkward silence fell. Your foreman, Zara finally said. You mentioned he sent the letter without your knowledge. Drew nodded. Frank Dawson, he's been with me for years. Seems to think he knows what's best for me. He looked down at his plate. He was close to my late wife. I'm sorry for your loss, she said quietly. Drew glanced up, expecting to see pity in her eyes, but found only gentle understanding. It was 3 years ago, fever took her. That doesn't make it easier, I imagine. No, it doesn't. Drew was surprised by his own candor. How much did Frank tell you in his letter? That you owned a successful ranch, that you were a good man who worked hard and treated people fairly. She hesitated. He mentioned your wife had passed, but not how recent it was. Drew made a mental note to have a long talk with Frank. And that was enough for you to travel all this way. Zara set down her fork. Mr. Montgomery, I came west because I had few options remaining in Boston. My father died last year, leaving significant debts. I worked as a teacher, but the salary was barely enough to survive. When I saw the advertisement, it seemed providential. So it was desperation, Drew said, oddly disappointed. Practicality, she corrected. I've never harbored romantic illusions about marriage. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals seemed sensible. Drew studied her. And now that you're here, now I need to reassess my situation. She squared her shoulders. I have some savings. Enough to sustain me while I look for work. As I said earlier, there's not much. The town has children, doesn't it? She interrupted. Children who need education, Drew nodded slowly. There's no proper school yet. Some of the mothers take turns teaching basics. Then perhaps there's a place for me after all. Drew found himself admiring her determination. Most women in her situation would be in tears or demanding immediate passage back east. Zara Bishop seemed intent on making the best of her circumstances. Miss Bishop, he said carefully, I feel responsible for your situation. Let me help you get established here if that's what you want. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Montgomery, but I've never been comfortable accepting charity. It's not charity, it's reparation for the inconvenience you've suffered because of my employee. She considered this, then nodded. Very well, I accept your assistance, but only until I can support myself. As they finished their meal, Drew found himself reluctant to end the evening. There was something refreshing about Zara's forthright manner, so different from the pitying glances or awkward silences he usually encountered in town. Would you care to take a walk? He asked impulsively. The evenings are pleasant this time of year. Surprise flickered across her face before she nodded. I'd like that. They strolled down Dustville's main street as twilight deepened into night. Oil lamps cast pools of golden light from store windows, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. It's beautiful here, Zara observed, gazing up at the vast expanse above them. In Boston, the buildings block much of the sky and the city lights dim the stars. The open spaces take some getting used to, Drew replied. Some folks find it lonely. And you, Drew considered the question. I find it honest. The land doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. Unlike people, she said softly. Some people, he agreed, glancing at her, but not all. They walked in companionable silence for a while, reaching the edge of town where the vast prairie stretched before them. Tell me about your ranch, Zara said. Drew found himself describing the rocking the sprawling pastures, the creek that ran through the property, the house his father had built and he had expanded. He told her about his herd of cattle and the horses he bred, his plans for the future of the ranch. It sounds wonderful, she said when he finished. You've built something meaningful. It's just a ranch. It's a legacy, she corrected. Something that will outlast you. The insight surprised him. I suppose it is. As they turned back toward the inn, Drew made a decision. Miss Bishop, I'd like to show you the ranch tomorrow. Perhaps you could meet with some of the families there. If you're serious about teaching, it would be good for them to meet you. I'd like that very much, she replied, a genuine smile warming her features for the first time since her arrival. That smile stayed with Drew long after he'd bid her good night and ridden back to his empty house. It followed him into his dreams, where it merged with memories he'd tried to forget and possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. Drew rose before dawn the next morning, a restlessness driving him from his bed. He found himself cleaning the house, removing layers of dust from surfaces that hadn't been touched in months. By the time he rode into town to collect Zara, the main rooms were more presentable than they had been since Sarah's death. Zara was waiting outside the inn, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket. Her hair was braided and pinned up beneath a modest hat, and she carried a small valise. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," she greeted him. "Miss Bishop," he replied, tipping his hat. "I brought a horse for you. Can you ride?" "I learned as a girl," she said, "though it's been some years." Drew helped her mount the gentle mare he'd brought, impressed by her ease despite her claimed rustiness. As they rode out of town, he noticed several curious glances from townspeople, including the knowing smile of Mrs. Holloway. "I should warn you," Drew said as they followed the trail toward the ranch. "The men will be curious about you. We don't get many visitors, especially not." He trailed off. "Especially not women," Zara supplied with a raised eyebrow. "Especially not educated Eastern ladies," Drew corrected. The October morning was crisp and clear, the surrounding mountains etched sharply against the blue sky. As they rode, Drew pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. Zara proved to be an attentive listener and asked thoughtful questions that revealed her intelligence. "There it is," Drew said as they crested a small rise, gesturing toward the ranch spread out below them. The main house stood in the center, surrounded by corrals, a barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant pastures and smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney. "It's lovely," Zara said, her eyes taking in the scene, "larger than I expected." "My father started with nothing," Drew explained as they rode down toward the buildings. "Built it up over 30 years before he passed. I've added to it since." As they approached the main house, Frank emerged from the barn, his weathered face breaking into a broad grin when he spotted Zara. Drew narrowed his eyes at his foreman, still irritated by the man's presumption but unable to sustain real anger in the face of his obvious good intentions. "Miss Bishop, I presume?" Frank called, hurrying forward to help Zara dismount. "Frank Dawson at your service. I must say you're even prettier than your letter suggested." "Mr. Dawson," Zara acknowledged with a nod. "I understand I have you to thank for my journey west." Frank had the good grace to look slightly abashed. "Meant well, madam, the boss here needed." He trailed off at Drew's warning look. "Well, the ranch could use a woman's touch. Miss Bishop is considering setting up a school," Drew interjected, dismounting and taking the reins of both horses. "For the children on the ranch and nearby farms." Frank's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Would be a blessing, madam. Got 3 families with young'uns working here and more at the neighboring spreads, nearest proper schools in Billings." "I'd like to meet them," Zara said. "The families, I mean." "Let's get you settled first," Drew suggested. "You can freshen up in the house and I'll have Frank gather the families for the midday meal." Drew led Zara to the main house, suddenly seeing it through her eyes, the solid log construction, the wide porch, the sturdy furniture his father had built decades ago. It was a good house, but it had grown cold and neglected since Sarah's passing. "This is the main room," he said, showing her into the combined sitting and dining area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall and windows looked out over the ranch yard. "Kitchen's through there, my office on the right, bedrooms down that hallway." Zara moved through the space, her eyes taking in details. "It's a fine home, Mr. Montgomery." "Drew," he said suddenly. "If you're staying in the area, you might as well call me Drew," she smiled. "And I'm Zara." A moment of silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. "I'll show you to the guest room," Drew finally said. "You can rest and freshen up before lunch." The guest room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. Drew realized with a pang that he hadn't entered this room since Sarah had prepared it for the last visitors they'd hosted together. "This is perfect," Zara said, setting her valise on the bed. "Thank you." "I'll leave you to settle in," Drew said, backing toward the door. Lunch will be ready in about an hour. Alone in the main room, Drew found himself straightening objects that didn't need straightening, suddenly aware of dust he'd missed and worn spots on the furniture. Having Zara in the house made him see its neglect with new clarity. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Frank stood on the porch, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Before you tear into me, boss," Frank began, "I just want to say, save it," Drew interrupted, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. "What you did was wrong, Frank. You had no right to interfere in my life that way." "Somebody had to," Frank replied, not backing down. "You've been half alive for 3 years, Drew. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that." "Don't tell me what Sarah would have wanted," Drew snapped, then immediately regretted his harshness. Frank had been like an uncle to Sarah, had known her since she was a girl. "She's a fine woman," Frank said quietly. "Miss Bishop, got spirit and smarts, reminds me a bit of Sarah that way." Drew sighed, the anger draining out of him. "She is, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to marry her or anyone." "Nobody said anything about marriage right away," Frank replied with a shrug. "Just thought you two should meet. Rest is up to you." He glanced toward the house. "Though I notice you brought her here mighty quick for a man with no interest." Before Drew could formulate a response, Frank continued, "I'll round up the families. Noon at the cookhouse." Drew nodded, watching his foreman walk away with a satisfied grin that suggested the older man thought he'd won the argument. Perhaps he had, Drew admitted to himself. Because despite his protests, he couldn't deny a growing interest in Zara Bishop that went beyond mere responsibility for her situation. When Zara emerged from the guest room, she had smoothed her hair and changed into a simpler dress more suited to ranch life. Drew found himself admiring the practical elegance with which she carried herself. "The families are gathering at the cookhouse," he told her. "Are you ready to meet them?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. "Do you think they'll be receptive to the idea of a school?" "I think they'll be thrilled," Drew said honestly. "Most of them worry about their children growing up without proper education." The cookhouse was the social center of the ranch, a large log building where the workers took their meals. As Drew and Zara approached, the sounds of conversation and laughter spilled out the open door. "Sounds lively," Zara observed. "Wait till they see you," Drew replied. "You're about to become the most interesting thing to happen at the Rockingham in years." Inside, nearly 20 people were gathered: ranch hands, their wives, and a handful of children ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Conversation died as Drew led Zara into the room, all eyes turning to the newcomer. "Everyone," Drew said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "this is Miss Zara Bishop from Boston. She's considering starting a school for the children in the area." A murmur of interest ran through the group, and Drew watched as the women exchanged meaningful glances. He made introductions, starting with his cook, Miguel, and working his way through the ranch hands and their families. Maria Sanchez, wife of one of his best wranglers, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Miss Bishop, what a blessing this would be. My Carlos and Lucia have only what I can teach them between chores." "How many children are there on the ranch?" Zara asked. 7 between 5 and 15, Maria replied, "and at least 10 more at nearby farms and ranches within riding distance." Drew watched as Zara engaged with the families, asking thoughtful questions about the children's current education and the parents' hopes for their futures. She had a natural way with the youngsters, kneeling to speak with the shy ones and responding with genuine interest to the bolder children's questions. "Where would the school be?" asked Thomas Reed, one of the older boys. "That's something we need to determine," Zara replied. "Ideally, it would be centrally located and accessible to all the children." "There's the old foreman's cabin," Drew found himself saying. "It hasn't been used since we built the new one. With some work, it could make a decent schoolhouse." Zara looked at him with surprise and gratitude. "That's very generous." "It's just sitting empty," Drew said with a shrug, though in truth the offer had surprised him as much as her. No sense in letting it go to waste. Lunch was a lively affair, with Zara seated between Maria Sanchez and Emma Whitaker, the two most outspoken of the ranch wives. By the end of the meal, plans were already forming for cleaning and preparing the old cabin, with the women volunteering labor and supplies. "They've practically adopted you," Drew commented as he and Zara walked back to the main house after lunch. "I haven't seen them this excited in a long time." "They're good people," Zara replied, "and they care deeply about their children's futures." "What about your future?" Drew asked. "Is this really what you want? Teaching in the middle of nowhere after the life you had in Boston?" Zara was quiet for a moment. "My life in Boston was comfortable in some ways, but increasingly untenable. After my father died, I discovered he had been living well beyond his means for years. The house I grew up in had to be sold to pay his debts, and my position at the ladies' seminary was compromised." "Compromised how?" A shadow crossed her face. "The headmistress's son developed an unwelcome interest in me. When I rejected his advances, she found reasons to criticize my teaching and eventually dismissed me." Drew felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "That's unjust. That's life for a woman without family or fortune," Zara replied matter-of-factly. "Which is why I considered the mail-order bride arrangement. It offered security and a fresh start. And now I see another possibility. These families need a teacher, I need a purpose." She looked around at the ranch spread before them. "This feels right in a way I didn't expect." Drew nodded, understanding more than he could express. The ranch had been his anchor after Sarah's death, giving him reason to rise each morning when grief threatened to drag him under. "You'd be welcome to stay in the guest room until the school is established," he offered. "It would be more convenient than riding back and forth from town." Zara hesitated. "Are you certain? I wouldn't want to impose." "It's a big house," Drew said. "Too big for just one person." "Thank you," she replied simply. "I accept." That evening, after Zara had gone to town to collect her belongings and returned to settle into the guest room, Drew sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The house behind him felt different, somehow warmer, more alive with Zara's presence inside. Frank joined him, offering a cup of coffee before settling into the chair beside him. "She's staying then?" the foreman asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Just until the school is established," Drew replied. "It's the practical solution." "Course it is," Frank agreed, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Practical." Drew shot him a warning look. "Don't get ahead of yourself, old man. She came here expecting marriage and found disappointment instead. She's making the best of a difficult situation." "If you say so," Frank replied, sipping his coffee. "But I've seen how you look at her, boss, and how she looks at you when you ain't watching." Drew frowned. "It's too soon." "It's been 3 years," Frank said gently. "Sarah would want you to be happy." "I know," Drew admitted, his voice barely audible. "But I don't know if I remember how." Frank clapped him on the shoulder as he stood to leave. "Then it's a good thing Miss Bishop seems like a patient teacher." The next weeks passed in a flurry of activity as the ranch community rallied around the school project. The old foreman's cabin was cleaned, repaired, and outfitted with crude but serviceable desks made by the ranch carpenter. Books were gathered, some donated by families, others purchased with funds collected throughout the area. Word spread to neighboring ranches and farms, and soon parents were riding in to meet the new teacher and enroll their children. Zara threw herself into the preparations with tireless energy, working alongside the ranch wives to ready the schoolhouse. Drew found himself drawn into the project as well, spending evenings helping Zara develop lessons appropriate for the varied ages and abilities of her prospective students. "You know a great deal about education for a rancher," Zara observed one night as they sat at the dining table, surrounded by books and papers. Drew smiled faintly. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She insisted on a proper education for me, even out here." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Drew agreed. "Died when I was 15, but she'd already instilled the love of learning by then." He glanced at the bookshelves lining one wall of the main room. Those were hers originally. I've added to the collection over the years. Zara looked at the shelves with new interest. I noticed you have an impressive library, Shakespeare alongside practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture. Knowledge is never wasted, Drew said, echoing his mother's frequent refrain. No, it isn't, Zara agreed softly. Their eyes met across the table, and Drew felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared values that went beyond their superficial differences. In that moment, he could almost hear Sarah's voice in his memory. The heart knows what it wants, Drew. You just have to be brave enough to listen. The thought startled him, and he looked away, reaching for another book. We should focus on the primer for the youngest children. If Zara noticed his sudden withdrawal, she gave no sign, turning her attention back to the task at hand with her characteristic thoroughness. As October yielded to November, the school took shape. A sign was mounted above the door, Rocking M School, painted by one of the ranch hands with a surprising artistic talent. Inside, the single room was transformed into a place of learning, with a blackboard at one end, bookshelves along the walls, and 3 rows of desks arranged by size. The day before the school's official opening, Drew found Zara standing alone in the completed schoolhouse, her expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. Having second thoughts, he asked from the doorway. She turned, offering a smile that didn't quite hide her nervousness. Not second thoughts, just wondering if I can live up to their expectations. These families are placing so much trust in me. Drew crossed the room to stand beside her. You'll be fine, better than fine, you'll be excellent. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. I know enough, Drew replied. I've watched you these past weeks. You're intelligent, dedicated, and genuinely care about these children. That's more than most of them have ever had in a teacher. Zara's eyes searched his face. Thank you for that. And for everything you've done to make this possible. You did the hard part, Drew said. I just provided the building. You provided much more than that, she corrected him. Support, encouragement, practical help. I couldn't have done this without you. Drew was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the soft scent of lavender that seemed to surround her, of the way the afternoon light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine stepping closer, drawing her into his arms. Instead, he took a step back. We should head back. Maria and the others are preparing a celebration dinner for the school opening. Something like disappointment flickered across Zara's face before she nodded. Of course, we shouldn't keep them waiting. The celebration dinner was held in the cookhouse, with every family connected to the ranch in attendance. The atmosphere was festive, with Miguel outdoing himself on a feast of roast beef, chicken, and all the trimmings. After the meal, several of the men produced instruments of fiddle, guitar, and harmonica, and music filled the room. Drew watched as Zara was drawn into conversation after conversation, her initial reserve having melted away during her weeks at the ranch. She belonged here now, he realized with a start. In the short time since her arrival, she had become an integral part of the community, valued and respected by all. Penny for your thoughts, boss, Frank said, settling into the chair beside Drew. Just thinking about how quickly things change, Drew replied. A month ago, the idea of a school here seemed impossible. A month ago, you were still half dead inside, Frank observed bluntly. Now look at you, Drew frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're coming back to life, Frank said, and we both know why. He nodded toward Zara, who was laughing at something Maria had said. Before Drew could respond, Thomas Reed approached Zara and asked her to dance as the musicians struck up a lively tune. Drew felt an unexpected twinge of jealousy as the teenage boy led her into the center of the room, then immediately chided himself for the reaction. Thomas was just a boy being polite to his new teacher. Other couples joined them on the makeshift dance floor, and soon the room was filled with whirling figures. Drew remained on the sidelines, watching as Zara was passed from partner to partner, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. When the music finally shifted to a slower waltz, Drew found himself moving across the room without conscious decision. He stopped before Zara, who had just finished dancing with one of his wranglers. "May I have this dance, Miss Bishop?" he asked formally. Surprise and pleasure lit her eyes. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Montgomery." As he took her hand and led her into the dance, Drew was acutely aware of the speculative glances being exchanged around the room. It had been years since he'd danced with anyone, and everyone present knew it. "I'm afraid I'm out of practice," he warned her as his hand settled at her waist. "You're doing fine," she assured him, following his lead with natural grace. They moved together with surprising ease, as if their bodies had known each other in some previous life. Drew found himself relaxing into the rhythm, enjoying the simple pleasure of holding her close within the acceptable boundaries of the dance. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "Less than I was," she admitted. "Being here tonight, seeing how much this means to everyone. It puts things in perspective." "The children adore you already," Drew said. "Half the boys have crushes on you if you haven't noticed." Zara laughed, the sound warming him from within. "I've taught enough to recognize the signs. They'll get over it once the novelty wears off and the hard work begins." "Don't be too sure," Drew replied, his voice dropping. "Some attractions only grow stronger with time." Their eyes met, and the rest of the room seemed to fade away. For a moment, they were alone in a world of their own making, the music carrying them beyond the boundaries of friendship into something more dangerous and exhilarating. The song ended too soon, and reality reasserted itself as applause broke out for the musicians. Drew reluctantly released Zara, instantly missing the warmth of her in his arms. "Thank you for the dance," she said softly. "The pleasure was mine," he replied, meaning it more than she could know. The celebration continued late into the evening, but an undercurrent had been established between them that hadn't existed before. Each glance, each casual touch seemed charged with new significance. By the time they rode back to the main house together under a canopy of stars, Drew knew something fundamental had changed. "It was a wonderful evening," Zara said as they reached the porch. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more. The ranch hasn't seen a celebration like that since." Drew trailed off, unwilling to mention Sarah, "Since your wife," Zara finished for him. Her voice held no jealousy or resentment, only gentle understanding. "It's all right to say her name, Drew. She was an important part of your life." Drew nodded, grateful for her perception. "Since Sarah, yes. She loved bringing people together." They stood in the soft darkness, the only light coming from the lamp Drew had left burning in the window. Neither seemed eager to end the evening and retreat to separate rooms. "Would you like some coffee?" Drew offered. "Or perhaps a nightcap?" "Coffee would be nice," Zara replied. "It's too beautiful a night to end just yet." Inside, Drew built up the fire while Zara prepared coffee in the kitchen. The domestic scene struck him with its rightness, the two of them moving comfortably through the house that had been so empty for so long. They took their coffee to the porch, settling into the wooden chairs to gaze out at the star-filled sky. The November night was cold but clear, their breath visible in the frosty air. "I never imagined I'd end up here," Zara said after a comfortable silence. "When I boarded that train in Boston, I thought I was heading toward a marriage of convenience with a stranger. Instead, I've found—" "What have you found?" Drew asked when she didn't continue. Zara turned to look at him, her face partially shadowed in the dim light. "A place where I belong. Work that matters. People who value me for who I am rather than what family I come from or what connections I have. The ranch has a way of stripping away pretenses," Drew said. "Out here, what matters is character, honesty, hard work, loyalty. You have those qualities in abundance." "As do you," she replied softly. Another silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. "When I first saw you step off that stage," Drew finally said, "I was determined to send you back east as quickly as possible. I thought Frank had made a terrible mistake." "And now," Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drew set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. Now I think it might have been the best thing he's ever done. Zara's breath caught audibly, her eyes wide in the darkness. Drew, I'm not proposing, he clarified quickly. Not yet. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. We're still getting to know each other, but I want you to know that I'm open to possibilities I thought were closed forever. A smile slowly spread across Zara's face, transforming it in the moonlight. I'm open to those possibilities too. Drew reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with her smoother ones. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars and enjoying the simple connection of touch. The school's opening day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of early snow that glittered in the morning sun. Drew rode with Zara to the schoolhouse, carrying additional supplies and helping her prepare for her first day of teaching. Nervous? He asked as she arranged books on her desk. Terribly, she admitted with a smile. But it's a good kind of nervous, like standing at the edge of something wonderful and frightening at the same time. Drew understood that feeling all too well. It was exactly how he felt whenever he looked at her now, especially after their conversation the previous night. You'll be magnificent, he assured her. Just be yourself. Children began arriving shortly after, some on horseback, others in wagons with their parents. The small schoolhouse quickly filled with excited voices, and the scrape of boots on the wooden floor as students found their seats. Drew watched from the doorway as Zara welcomed each child by name, having memorized them all during the preparations. Her nervousness had vanished, replaced by a calm authority that immediately established her as the teacher. When all the students were seated, 17 in total, ranging from 5-year-old Lucy Sanchez to 16-year-old Thomas Reed, Zara moved to the front of the room. Parents and ranch workers, including Drew, stood around the perimeter, witnessing this important moment in their community's history. Good morning, Zara began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the room. Welcome to the first day of the Rockingham School. My name is Miss Bishop, and I am honored to be your teacher. Drew felt a surge of pride as she continued, outlining her expectations and plans for the school year ahead. This remarkable woman had transformed a vague idea into reality through sheer determination and hard work. And in the process, she had begun to transform him as well. As the formal opening concluded and the actual teaching began, the adults gradually filtered out, leaving Zara alone with her students. Drew was the last to leave, catching her eye across the room and receiving a warm smile in return before he stepped outside. Frank was waiting for him, leaning against a hitching post with his usual knowing expression. School seems to be off to a good start. It is, Drew agreed. She's a natural teacher. Uh-huh, Frank replied, falling into step beside Drew as they walked toward their horses. And a natural at other things too, I reckon. Drew shot him a warning glance. Don't start, Frank. Just saying what everyone can see, boss. That woman's brought life back to this ranch and to you. Frank mounted his horse, looking down at Drew with uncharacteristic seriousness. Don't let fear keep you from happiness. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. Before Drew could respond, Frank nudged his horse forward and rode off toward the pastures where work awaited. Drew remained behind, staring at the schoolhouse where Zara's voice could faintly be heard leading her students in recitation. Frank was right, Drew acknowledged silently. Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to spend his life alone, drowning in grief. She had been full of life and joy, embracing each day as a gift. Her last words to him had been a plea, "Live, Drew, promise me you'll live." Until Zara's arrival, he hadn't been keeping that promise. He'd been existing, not living, going through the motions of life without truly engaging with it. Now, for the first time in 3 years, he felt fully alive again, with all the risk and reward that entailed. The next weeks passed in a rhythm of work and growing connection. Drew found reasons to visit the schoolhouse frequently, ostensibly to check on repairs or deliver supplies, but in reality to see Zara in her element, teaching with a passion that inspired her students to exceed even their own expectations. In the evenings, they would often sit by the fire in the main house, discussing the day's events or reading together in companionable silence. Sometimes Drew would play the guitar that had been gathering dust since Sarah's death, and occasionally Zara would sing in a sweet, clear voice that made his heart ache with its beauty. As November deepened toward December, the weather grew colder, and the first serious snowfall blanketed the ranch. The school continued despite the weather, with families determined that not even Montana winters would interrupt their children's education. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Drew and Zara sat close to the fire, a chessboard between them. They had discovered a mutual love for the game, and their matches had become increasingly competitive as they learned each other's strategies. "Checkmate," Zara announced with satisfaction, moving her queen into position. Drew studied the board, then laughed and tipped over his king in surrender. "You're getting too good at this. I need to find a game you're not naturally skilled at." "Fishing," Zara suggested with a smile. "I'm terrible at fishing, no patience for it." "I'll remember that come spring," Drew promised, beginning to reset the pieces. "Another game." Zara shook her head, stifling a yawn. "I should get some rest. The children have their Christmas pageant to prepare for, and they're more excited than focused these days." "Christmas," Drew repeated, a shadow crossing his face. "I'd almost forgotten." Zara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Is it a difficult time for you?" Drew nodded, turning his hand to clasp hers. Sarah loved Christmas. The decorations, the carols, the gifts, she made it magical, he sighed. "I haven't really celebrated since she died." "Would it be easier if we kept it simple this year?" Zara asked gently. "The school pageant is important for the children, but we needn't do more than that here at the house." Drew studied her face in the firelight, moved by her consideration. "No, that's not what I want." Sarah would hate to think her memory had turned Christmas into something sad. He squeezed her hand. "I think it's time to create new memories. Will you help me?" The smile that illuminated Zara's face was answer enough. "I'd be honored." Over the next weeks, the main house was gradually transformed. Zara and Drew gathered evergreen boughs from the surrounding forest to decorate the mantelpiece and doorways. They strung popcorn and cranberries for garlands, and Drew surprised Zara by producing ornaments that had been carefully packed away for 3 years. "Sarah made many of these," he explained as they hung the decorations on a small pine tree set up in the corner of the main room. Her mother taught her how to create ornaments from scraps of fabric and bits of colored glass. Zara handled each one with reverence. "They're beautiful." She was clearly very talented. She was, Drew agreed, finding that the memories now brought more comfort than pain. "She would have liked you, Zara. You share her love of beauty and learning." Zara looked up at him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "I wish I could have known her." "In a way, you know her through this place," Drew said. "She helped make the ranch what it is. Her touch is everywhere." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the tree gradually taking shape beneath their hands. Outside, snow continued to fall, insulating the house in a cocoon of white silence. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," Drew said finally, hanging the last ornament. "The school term ends next week for the Christmas break. Would you consider staying here permanently, not just as a guest, but as the ranch's teacher?" Zara's hands stilled. "Are you offering me employment, Drew?" "I'm offering you a place," he clarified. "The school, the guest room in the house for as long as you want it, a salary so you can be independent. The children need you, the ranch needs you." He took a deep breath. "I need you." "As the teacher," Zara said carefully. "As the teacher," Drew agreed. "And as whatever else we might become to each other, given time." Zara was quiet so long that Drew feared he had overstepped. Then she looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, I'll stay." Drew's heart soared. "You're certain this isn't Boston?" "Winters are harsh, luxuries are few, and the work never really ends." "I've never been more certain of anything," Zara replied. "Boston was my past. She gestured around the room, but her eyes remained on him. This is my future. The night of the school pageant arrived, and the small schoolhouse was packed with families from throughout the area. Extra benches had been brought in, and lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the festive scene. Zara had transformed the front of the room into a stage, with blankets serving as curtains. Behind them, excited whispers and occasional giggles could be heard as the children prepared for their performance. Drew sat in the back row, watching as Zara moved confidently among the parents, greeting each family and ensuring everyone was comfortable. She wore her best dress for the occasion, a deep green wool that complemented her coloring and drew admiring glances from men and women alike. "She's something special, ain't she?" Frank murmured, settling onto the bench beside Drew. "She is," Drew agreed, not bothering to hide his admiration. "You gonna make an honest woman of her, boss? Folks are starting to talk about her living at the main house." Drew frowned. "She's a respectable teacher living in my guest room. There's nothing improper about the arrangement." "Never said there was," Frank replied, "but folks know a good match when they see one, and they see how you two look at each other." Before Drew could respond, Zara stepped to the front of the room and clapped her hands for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to the teacher. "Welcome, everyone, to our Christmas pageant," Zara began, her voice clear and confident. "The children have worked very hard to prepare this program for you. They'll be presenting the Christmas story, reciting poetry they've memorized, and singing carols we've practiced together." Drew watched with pride as she introduced the program, thinking how far she had come from the uncertain woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 months earlier. She belonged here now, respected and admired by the entire community. The pageant itself was a charming combination of earnest performances and occasional mishaps that drew indulgent laughter from the audience. Lucy Sanchez forgot her lines as the angel, but was prompted by her older brother playing Joseph. Thomas Reid, as the narrator, spoke with surprising eloquence, his voice having deepened considerably over the past months. When the final carol ended and the children took their bows to enthusiastic applause, Drew found himself on his feet with the rest of the audience, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. This sense of community, of shared joy and purpose, had been missing from his life for too long. After the performance, the benches were pushed back and tables set up for a communal feast. Each family had brought food to share, resulting in a spread that covered 3 long tables. Children ran about excitedly while adults exchanged news and holiday wishes. Drew made his way through the crowd to where Zara stood accepting congratulations on the successful pageant. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up in a way that made his heart skip. "What did you think?" she asked eagerly. "It was wonderful," he replied honestly. "You've accomplished something remarkable here, Zara. 2 months ago, these children barely knew their letters. Now they're reciting poetry and performing plays. They're quick learners," she said modestly, "and they have supportive families. They also have an exceptional teacher." Drew looked around at the festive gathering. "You've given this community a gift beyond measure." "The community has given me just as much in return," Zara replied, her eyes holding his. "A home, purpose, acceptance." The word home resonated between them, carrying layers of meaning neither was quite ready to articulate fully. Before Drew could respond, Maria Sanchez approached with a plate of food for Zara. "You must eat, Miss Bishop," Maria insisted. "You've been so busy with the children, you haven't had a bite." The moment broken, Drew stepped back to allow others to congratulate Zara. Throughout the evening, he found his gaze continually drawn to her as she moved through the crowd, equally at ease with grizzled ranch hands and shy children. It was late when the celebration finally wound down. Families departed in wagons and on horseback, lantern light cutting through the darkness as they made their way home through the snow. Drew and Zara were among the last to leave, staying to help clean the schoolhouse. "You should be proud," Drew said as they rode back to the main house together, the full moon casting blue-white light across the snow-covered landscape. Tonight was special for everyone. I am proud, Zara admitted, not just of the children but of being part of this community. She glanced at him. Thank you for making that possible. You did that yourself, Drew corrected her. I just provided the opportunity. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the soft crunch of snow beneath their horses' hooves. I have something for you, Drew said as they neared the house. A Christmas gift. I was going to wait until Christmas morning, but tonight seems right. Zara looked surprised. You didn't have to get me anything? I wanted to, Drew replied simply. Inside the warmth of the house, Drew built up the fire while Zara removed her coat and boots. When the flames were crackling merrily, he disappeared into his bedroom, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. It's not much, he said, suddenly self-conscious as he handed it to her. But I thought you might like it. Zara sat on the sofa and carefully untied the ribbon, folding back the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound book. Her eyes widened as she opened it and saw the title page, Poems by Emily Dickinson. This is the first edition, she breathed, turning the pages reverently. How did you? I wrote to a bookseller in Boston, Drew explained, sitting beside her. He located a copy. I remembered you mentioning she was your favorite poet. Zara looked up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you, Drew. You're welcome, he replied, pleased by her reaction. I thought you might read from it sometimes, here by the fire in the evenings. I will, she promised, then set the book carefully aside. I have something for you too, though it's not nearly as special. She retrieved a package from her room, wrapped in plain cloth and tied with twine. I made it myself, so please forgive any imperfections. Drew unwrapped the gift to find a hand-knitted scarf in shades of blue and gray. The pattern was intricate, and he could tell it had taken many hours to complete. It's perfect, he said, running his fingers over the soft wool. When did you find time to make this? In the evenings, after you'd gone to bed, Zara admitted with a smile. I wanted it to be a surprise. Drew wrapped the scarf around his neck, appreciating its warmth. I'll wear it every day this winter. They sat together before the fire, the decorated tree glowing softly in the corner, surrounded by the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed constant conversation to feel connected. This is the first Christmas in 3 years that's felt right, Drew said finally, his voice low. Thank you for that. Zara turned to look at him, her face softened by firelight. I was thinking the same thing. Last Christmas I was alone in a boarding house in Boston, wondering what would become of me. And now I'm home, she said simply. Drew reached out and took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. Yes, you are. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the world outside the windows a pristine expanse of white broken only by the tracks of wildlife and the smoke rising from chimneys across the ranch. Drew woke early, as was his habit, but instead of the emptiness that had greeted Christmas mornings past, he felt anticipation for the day ahead. He built up fires in the main room and kitchen, then prepared coffee and a simple breakfast. The scent of brewing coffee soon brought Zara from her room, wrapped in a woolen robe over her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Merry Christmas, she greeted him, accepting the cup he offered. Merry Christmas, he replied, suddenly struck by the domestic intimacy of the moment. This was how marriage would feel. He realized this easy comfort of shared mornings and quiet companionship. They enjoyed a leisurely breakfast before dressing for the day. Church services would be held at noon in town, followed by a community dinner at the hotel. Drew had arranged for a sleigh to take them there, a surprise he was looking forward to revealing. When Zara emerged from her room dressed in her best winter outfit, a deep blue dress with a matching jacket, Drew felt a familiar tightening in his chest. She was beautiful, and not just in appearance. Her inner strength, intelligence, and compassion had become as essential to his days as sunrise and sunset. You look lovely, he said, helping her with her coat. Thank you, she replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. You're quite handsome yourself. Drew wore his best suit, seldom used since his occasional trips to Billings for business. The new scarf from Zara completed his outfit, its blues bringing out the color of his eyes. I have another surprise, he told her as they stepped onto the porch. Our transportation to town. Zara gasped with delight at the sight of the sleigh waiting in front of the house, pulled by two matching bay horses with bells on their harnesses. Oh, Drew, it's like something from a storybook. I thought you might enjoy it, he said, pleased by her reaction. Frank helped me get it ready. It hasn't been used in years. The sleigh ride to town was magical, the bells jingling in rhythm with the horses' pace as they glided over the snow-packed road. Zara sat close beside Drew, wrapped in furs against the cold, her face alight with joy as she took in the winter landscape. I've never been in a sleigh before, she confessed. In Boston, we had carriages, but this is much more exciting. It's the best way to travel in winter, Drew replied, guiding the horses with practiced ease, smoother than a wagon over the snow. They arrived at the small church in Dustville to find it already filling with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area. The interior was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, creating a festive atmosphere despite the building's simplicity. As they took their seats, Drew was acutely aware of the speculative glances directed their way. His appearance in church after years of absence was noteworthy enough. Arriving with the attractive new schoolteacher guaranteed gossip that would last well into the new year. Zara seemed unbothered by the attention, greeting acquaintances with her usual quiet dignity. When Mrs. Holloway from the hotel stopped to speak with them, her knowing smile made it clear she had drawn her own conclusions about their relationship. So nice to see you two together, the older woman said. The school has been such a blessing for the community, Miss Bishop. Everyone speaks highly of your teaching. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Zara replied. The children make it a joy. And living at the ranch must be more comfortable than the hotel, Mrs. Holloway added with barely disguised curiosity. Mr. Montgomery has been very generous in providing accommodations, Zara said smoothly, neither confirming nor denying the older woman's implicit question about their arrangement. The church service was simple but heartfelt, with familiar carols and readings from the Christmas story. Drew found himself singing along, his deep voice blending with Zara's clearer tones beside him. The familiar rituals that had once been painful reminders of Sarah's absence now felt like connections to a larger community and shared tradition. After the service, they joined the crowd moving toward the hotel for the community dinner. The dining room had been expanded into the adjacent parlor to accommodate the large gathering, with long tables set up and decorated with holly and candles. Drew and Zara found themselves seated with a mixture of townspeople and ranchers, including the doctor and his wife, the general store owner, and several neighboring ranch families. Conversation flowed easily, with Drew participating more than he had in any social gathering since Sarah's death. The school is a fine addition to the area, Dr. Wilson commented as plates of roast turkey and ham circulated. My wife and I visited during the pageant. Impressive what you've accomplished in such a short time, Miss Bishop. Thank you, Doctor, Zara replied. I'm fortunate to have such eager students and supportive parents. We're the fortunate ones, Drew said, surprising himself with the public acknowledgement. The ranch hasn't felt this alive in years. His comment drew approving nods from those who understood the difficult path he had walked since losing Sarah. Mr. Jenkins, the general store owner, raised his glass in a subtle toast. To new beginnings, the older man said with a significant look at Drew and Zara. Glasses were raised around the table. To new beginnings. Drew's eyes met Zara's across the rim of his glass, and the connection between them seemed to strengthen and deepen in that moment of shared understanding. Whatever happened next, they had already given each other the precious gift of renewal. The dinner lasted well into the afternoon, with music and conversation continuing as darkness fell outside. When Drew and Zara finally took their leave, thanking Mrs. Holloway for the meal, the sleigh waited to carry them back to the ranch through the gathering dusk. The return journey was peaceful, with stars beginning to appear in the clear sky above them. Drew guided the horses with one hand, his other arm around Zara to share warmth against the evening chill. "It was a lovely day," Zara said, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. "The best Christmas I can remember in a long time," Drew agreed. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the sleigh runners cutting through snow and the rhythmic jingling of the harness bells. "Drew," Zara said finally, her voice thoughtful, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you think there comes a point when holding on to grief becomes a way of avoiding life rather than honoring what's been lost?" Drew considered the question carefully, understanding its significance for both of them. "Yes," he said finally. "I think I reached that point without realizing it. Grief became comfortable, familiar, safer than risking my heart again." Zara nodded against his shoulder. "I felt similarly after my father died, not the same kind of loss, certainly, but I used my grief and difficulties as a reason to withdraw." The mail-order bride arrangement was partly practicality but also a way of not having to risk emotional involvement. "And now," Drew asked, his heart beating faster. "Now I find myself wanting to risk again," she admitted softly. "Despite my best intentions." Drew tightened his arm around her. "I understand completely." When they reached the ranch, the house stood dark and welcoming against the night sky. Drew helped Zara from the sleigh, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. The moment stretched between them, possibility hanging in the air like the frost of their breath. "I should see to the horses," Drew said reluctantly. "I'll wait for you inside," Zara replied, her eyes holding his. "Perhaps we could have some hot chocolate by the fire before turning in." "I'd like that," Drew agreed. The stable chores seemed to take longer than usual as Drew's mind raced with thoughts of Zara waiting in the house. By the time he returned, she had changed into a simpler dress and prepared the promised hot chocolate. The main room was illuminated only by firelight and the glow of the Christmas tree, creating an intimate atmosphere that both welcomed and unsettled him. "I thought you might be cold after tending to the horses," Zara said, handing him a steaming mug. "Thank you." Drew accepted the drink gratefully, warming his hands around the cup. It was worth the chill for such a perfect day. They settled onto the sofa before the fire, closer than they might have sat a month ago, but still maintaining a proper distance. The hot chocolate was rich and sweet, flavored with cinnamon in a way that reminded Drew of his mother's recipe. "This is delicious," he commented. "Where did you learn to make it this way?" "My mother," Zara replied with a soft smile. "It was our Christmas tradition. No matter how tight finances might be, she always made sure we had proper hot chocolate on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day." "You don't speak of her often," Drew observed. "She died when I was 16, Zara explained. "Heart failure, the doctors said, though I think she died of exhaustion and worry. My father's business was failing even then, and she worked herself to the bone trying to maintain appearances." "I'm sorry," Drew said, understanding the weight of such a loss. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was strong, practical, but with a secret love of poetry and beautiful things." Zara smiled at a distant memory. "She would have approved of Montana, I think. She always said true beauty needed no artifice." They talked for hours, sharing memories of their childhoods and early adulthood, gradually filling in the blank spaces in their knowledge of each other. Drew found himself speaking more freely about Sarah than he had with anyone since her death, finding comfort rather than pain in the shared recollections. "She sounds wonderful," Zara said when he described Sarah's talent for making their house a home. "Creative and warm-hearted." "She was," Drew agreed. "For a long time, I couldn't imagine finding that kind of connection again." He looked at Zara directly. "I'm beginning to believe I was wrong." Zara met his gaze steadily, a flush rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. Drew. Drew set aside his empty mug and took her hands in his. Zara, I need to be honest with you. These past months, you've brought something back to life in me that I thought was gone forever. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to share every thought and experience with you. I feel the same, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I came here expecting a practical arrangement, not this. Not what? Drew pressed gently. Not falling in love, Zara said, the words hanging in the air between them like a tangible thing. Drew's heart soared at her admission. Is that what's happened? Yes, she replied simply. Despite all my practical intentions, Drew reached up to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her soft skin. I love you too, Zara Bishop. I think I have since that first day when you refused to be sent back east like an unwanted package. Her laugh was breathless. I was terrified that day, trying so hard not to show it. You were magnificent, Drew told her. Strong and proud and determined. And you were intimidating, she countered with a smile. So stern and convinced you didn't need anyone. I was wrong, Drew said. I needed you, I just didn't know it yet. The space between them had diminished as they spoke, drawn together by the magnetic pull of shared feeling. When Drew finally leaned forward to kiss her, it felt like the most natural progression in the world, inevitable and right. Her lips were soft beneath his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that sent heat coursing through him. Drew cupped her face in his hands, pouring months of growing affection into the gentle pressure of his mouth against hers. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zara's eyes were bright with emotion. That was worth waiting for, she whispered. Drew smiled, resting his forehead against hers. The first of many, I hope. Many, she agreed, her hands resting lightly on his chest. They remained close, talking softly and exchanging occasional kisses as the fire burned low in the grate. It was a perfect conclusion to Christmas Day, and the beginning of something neither had expected to find when Zara stepped off the stagecoach in Dustville. Winter settled over the ranch with a rhythm of cold mornings, busy days, and intimate evenings. The school continued despite occasional blizzards, with Zara riding to the schoolhouse bundled against the cold, sometimes accompanied by Drew when the weather was particularly challenging. Their relationship blossomed in the quiet moments between work and responsibilities. Drew found himself smiling more, laughing often, and planning for a future that now included Zara. For her part, Zara thrived in her dual roles as teacher and Drew's companion, her natural reserve giving way to confidence and joy. News of their courtship, for that was what it had become, spread quickly through the community. No one seemed surprised. If anything, there was a collective sense of satisfaction that Drew Montgomery had finally found happiness again. Frank was particularly pleased, though he refrained from saying, "I told you so," outright. His smug expressions whenever he saw Drew and Zara together conveyed the message clearly enough. As January gave way to February, Drew began making plans. He consulted with Frank about expanding the main house, adding rooms that would make it more suitable for a family. He rode to Billings on business, returning with a small velvet box that he kept hidden in his desk drawer, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a clear February evening as they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "Spring will be here before we know it," Zara observed, her hand warm in his. "The children are already talking about planting the school garden. I've been thinking about spring too," Drew replied, his heart racing with anticipation. "About new beginnings." Zara turned to look at him, something in his tone catching her attention. "Oh." Drew took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. "Zara Bishop, when you arrived here last October, I thought Frank had made a terrible mistake. Now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me." He produced the small velvet box and opened it to reveal a sapphire ring set in gold. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Zara's eyes widened first at the ring, then at Drew's face. "Are you certain? It's only been a few months. I've never been more certain of anything," Drew replied. "I love you, Zara. I want to build a life with you, teach with you, work beside you, raise a family if we're so blessed. I want to grow old watching you read by the fire." Tears filled Zara's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Drew Montgomery." Drew slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they parted, both were smiling through tears of joy. "The sapphire reminded me of your eyes," Drew explained, nodding toward the ring. "And it seemed right, something unique for a woman unlike any other." Zara admired the ring on her finger. "It's beautiful, perfect." "When?" Drew asked. "Spring, summer, spring," Zara decided. "When everything is new and growing, April perhaps." "April it is," Drew agreed, already imagining their life together stretching out before them like the vast Montana sky, wide open and full of possibility. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Congratulations poured in, along with offers of help with wedding preparations. The community that had embraced Zara as their teacher now prepared to welcome her as Drew Montgomery's wife. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Maria Sanchez and several other ranch wives helped Zara create a wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Billings. Drew, with Frank's assistance, added a proper bedroom suite to the main house, connecting it to the existing structure with a short hallway. April arrived with the promised renewal, snow melting to reveal tender green shoots and early wildflowers dotting the prairie. The wedding date was set for the third Saturday of the month, with the ceremony to take place at the ranch rather than in town. On the morning of their wedding day, Drew woke early, a sense of rightness and anticipation filling him. He had spent the previous night in the bunkhouse at Frank's insistence, bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, boss, and was eager to return to the main house, soon to be truly their home. The ranch was transformed for the occasion. A bower of early spring flowers and greenery had been erected near the house, with rows of benches arranged before it. Tables laden with food and drink waited under canopies, and lanterns hung from trees to provide light when evening fell. Guests began arriving by mid-morning, not only the ranch families and townspeople from Dustville, but also friends from neighboring ranches, and even a few of Zara's former colleagues who had made the journey from Boston upon receiving her invitation. Drew, dressed in a new suit ordered specially from Billings, waited beneath the flower-decorated arch with the minister from Dustville. Frank stood beside him as best man, unusually neat in his Sunday best, his gray beard trimmed and his weathered face shining with pride. "Never thought I'd see this day," Frank murmured as they watched the gathering crowd. "You made it happen," Drew reminded him. "With your meddling," Frank chuckled. "Just gave fate a little nudge, you two did the rest." Music began, a fiddle and guitar played by ranch hands with surprising talent signaling the start of the ceremony. The assembled guests turned to watch as Maria's daughter Lucy came down the makeshift aisle, scattering wildflower petals from a basket. And then Zara appeared, and Drew forgot to breathe. She was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, her chestnut hair crowned with a wreath of early spring blossoms. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers and walked alone, head held high, her eyes fixed on Drew as if he were the only person in the world. When she reached him, Drew took her hands in his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," she replied with a smile that outshone the spring sunshine. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of their lives together. When Drew slipped the gold band onto Zara's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady despite the emotion filling his chest. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Montgomery, you may kiss your bride." Drew needed no further encouragement. He drew Zara into his arms and kissed her with all the love and promise he felt, heedless of the cheers and applause erupting around them. When they finally parted, both were laughing with the pure joy of the moment. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing, music and storytelling, with the entire community sharing in their happiness. Drew and Zara moved through it all in a haze of contentment, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone present. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the continuing festivities, Drew led Zara away from the crowd to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree that had witnessed generations of Montgomery family history. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "I never imagined finding this kind of happiness, Drew. When I left Boston, I thought I was settling for security without love. Instead, I found everything I never dared to dream of." "I thought love was finished for me," Drew admitted, stroking her hair. "That I'd had my chance and lost it. You proved me wrong in the best possible way." They stood together in the gentle spring night, the sounds of celebration a distant backdrop to their private moment of communion. Above them, stars filled the vast Montana sky, witnesses to the miracle of two lives joined against all odds. "We should return to our guests," Zara said eventually, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "They'll understand if we disappear," Drew suggested with a smile. "It is our wedding day, after all." Zara laughed, the sound as joyful and free as the woman herself had become in the month since her arrival. "Mr. Montgomery, are you suggesting we abandon our own wedding celebration, Mrs. Montgomery?" Drew replied, savoring the new name. "I'm suggesting we start our life together exactly as we choose. The rest of the world can wait." Hand in hand, they returned to the celebration for one last dance before bidding their guests good night. There were knowing smiles and good-natured teasing as they made their way toward the house, but neither cared. They had found each other against all odds, and the future stretched before them like the endless Montana prairie filled with promise, challenge, and the certainty of love to guide them through whatever came. 5 years later, Drew stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Zara conducted a reading lesson under the sprawling oak tree. Around her sat not only the children from the ranch and neighboring properties, but also their own 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, and infant son, James, sleeping in a basket beside his mother. The Rocking M had prospered along with their family. The school had grown into a proper building with 2 classrooms, as Zara had recently hired an assistant teacher to help with the increasing number of students. Drew had expanded the cattle operation and added a horse breeding program that was gaining recognition throughout the territory. But the true measure of their success wasn't in the improved ranch or expanding school. It was in the love that filled their home, in the family they were building together, and in the community that had flourished around them. As if sensing his gaze, Zara looked up from her lesson and smiled at him across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that smile still had the power to quicken Drew's heart and remind him of how fortunate he was. A mail-order bride who never truly was, a ranch that needed healing as much as its owner, and a love that grew from the most unlikely beginning. These were the elements of the life they had built together. And as Drew returned his wife's smile, he knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would change a single step of the journey that had brought them home to each other.